The Hells Angels came to my uncle's funeral. What's the nicest thing you've seen a gang do? I didn't see this personally, but about 20 years ago my mother was a 5th grade teaching Compton. For those of you who don't know, Compton pretty notorious when it comes to its concentration of gangs and gang violence, especially in the immigrant district, which is where she lived and taught. It was a pretty average night if you heard between 1 to 10 gunshots. My mom, being the faking boss that she is, refused to leave the district or teach anywhere else. Anyways, her first year teaching there she had a group of 5 boys, all of them living in destitute poverty. During break, they loved to draw pictures of cars like Lamborghinis and Porsches, all things that they could never afford. They all promised my mom that if they ever got a car, she would be the first person that they would take for a ride. Skipping ahead about 8 years, my mom was leaving the school late after staying to grade some tests. As she was walking to her car, she saw a shady group of boys leaning against a car watching her. She began to walk fast, but they boys got up and began walking towards her. All of them were wearing the telltale blue bandanas, Crips, and my mom said she could see one who was packing a Saturday night special. Anyways, just as she got to her car door, the group of boys reached her. One of them spoke in deep, intimidating voice, "Missus, we're here to take you for a ride." My mom thought she was being kidnapped and reached for her pepper spray. Then another of the group stepped forward and introduced themselves as the 5 boys that she taught about 8 years ago. They squeezed my mom into the backseat of a rolled, beat up Cadillac between 2 of the students. They took her to a really fancy restaurant somewhere and paid for her meal in full. Later they took her back to her car, dropped her off, and told her if she ever needed anything to call them. Then drove off. TLDR, my mom went out to some fine dining with some Crip members. Edit. Porsches, not porches. It would still be pretty cool to see someone driving a Porsche though. When I was younger, I lived in a relatively bad part of town. I was /Asian/white, and most of my neighbors were black or Hispanic. I started playing sports at school and made friends with a number of kids, including this one guy named Thaddeus who was 2 years older than me. Thaddeus was a big tough kid, but a secret that he kept from a lot of people was that he sang like an angel. He told me once and sang "R. Kelly's I Believe I Can Fly," and I've never heard it done better. I swore to him I would never tell a soul, and I never did. Thaddeus got involved in some gang activity later on, and I lost touch with him until high school. I was walking home late one night when I was approached by a group of black teenagers who apparently saw me as an easy mark. I wasn't sure whether I was just going to get mugged or was going to get an ass kicking out of it too. I think my membership on the football team was the only thing that saved me from an immediate beatdown, but it wasn't going to end well. Suddenly, I hear a loud "Hey, the fuck are you doing? Leave him alone." I look over, and Thaddeus and a couple older, 20 plus, guys are pushing into this circle. Thaddeus throws an arm around my shoulders and says he's cool. "You fuck with CMXI, you fuck with me." The teenagers dispersed, and Thaddeus made sure I was okay before sending me on my way. I was a bit shook up at the time, so it wasn't until I reflected later that I realized that Thaddeus and all the older guys were pretty obviously strapped, and their status saved me from any trouble for the remainder of my time in high school. I was visiting Central America a few years back and decided that it was a good idea to go into the projects in Managua Point. Just to paint a mental picture here, most of the houses that could actually be called houses were surrounded by brick and razor wire, and the rest were slapdash structures of sheet metal and anything else that could be found. It wasn't the nicest of places, to be sure. Anyways, I figured that it would be cool for 4 reasons. A. I'm actually a little darker than many of the locals despite my blue eyes and Eastern European heritage. B. I speak pretty good Spanish. C. I had a Salvadorian friend with me, and D. I was, at the time, the most badass motherfucker around, or so I thought. So Marcus, my Salvadorian friend, and I were walking through Camilo Ortega past a park when we see a brawl break out in the park at the end of the street. All of a sudden we hear bang bang, a gun firing into the massive bodies, and they just scatter with the shooter still popping off shots as they ran. Marcus and I were as confused as we were scared, not knowing the neighborhood, but two of the guys from the brawl stepped out from between two of the ramshackle houses to our left and basically dragged us in with them. At this point I was certain I was a dead man, but they just told us to lay low with them and they would get us out of there. They didn't ever actually identify themselves, but Marcus, who grew up surrounded by gang activity, told me he was almost certain they were M18, Mera 18, so there we were in a hut, sitting with gang members, praying we weren't about to get killed. It was a strange experience. They stayed true to their word though, and got us out of Ortega. Needless to say, I felt slightly less bad as after that point TLDR walking through bad neighborhood in Managua, got saved by gang members. Edit, M18, not manuscript 18. My husband and I tow our camper from Florida to Tennessee twice a year, to camp in the Smokies. A good stopping point is an area called Locust Grove, Georgia. There's a cute overnight RV park close on I-75, and also the most kick-ass Mexican restaurant you'd never guess was in a strip mall where we like to grab a bite and a drink. One night we got in a little late and were finishing up dinner and watching the debut of Favre playing for the Jets on TV at the Mexican place. The game went to the half and the restaurant was closing up. We asked the waiter if he knew of any place we could catch the second half, and he pointed us to some bar across the interstate. Off we go to a little nondescript place named The Grove, seated in front of your typical interstate motel. There were just a handful of cars in the lot, but it still looked open, so we headed in. The waiter was right, they were showing the game on a big TV, so we grabbed some stools and ordered some beers. I get kind of loud watching football, especially if I've had a few. So I'll let out a few hoots and hollers, and the waitress heads over to see if we want another round. I feel dumb at this point, because I'm in a strange bar with locals, being sort of loud, so I apologized to the waitress. She replied in the heaviest sweetest Georgia drawl, "Baby, you're in a biker bar, you be as noisy as you want," and then went off to get our beers. That's when we took a good look around, and our dummies realize we are in a real life biker bar. Like, hardcore. We notice a poker game in the back room. We see the biker flags hanging. We see the bikers at the bar in the shadows. Biker. Bar. Big time. But also good football game, cold beers, and what feels to be a fairly non-threatening, laid-back environment. So we stay late, really late, and get to know Kat, the bartender, and others seated at the bar, who are all super nice. We got invited back anytime during our travels. In fact, we learned many truckers stay in the parking lot of the Grove because it's convenient and they serve food. Kat told us we could park our rig there anytime, which killed us. Our camper was now a rig, and to just call ahead and she'd have a hot meal waiting. She also said it's safer than the RV park because it's a biker bar and noon will let you get faked with if you're our guest. So, we now hit the Grove every time we pass through on I-75 if we can. We learned in later visits that the gang whose bar that is are the Outlaws. They seem very nice. In fact, the last time we were there they were hosting a charity event, a chili cook-off I think, for kids. TLDR suburban couple stops in a bar on the way to go camping to see a football game. Finds out it's a very friendly biker bar belonging to the Outlaws. Goes back twice a year to say hello and have beers. I grew up in a small town, and for some odd reason 10 to 15 young guys of the Eminem variety started a gang. Then our local newspaper ran a story about how everyone knew who they were, and they were leaving graffiti all over our small town. A bunch of them got charged with some misdemeanors during the peak of their existence. At the height of their fame, our high school principal gave morning announcement basically saying, "Please stop being a gang, and please stop vandalizing stuff." It did the trick. It was really funny, because if you asked any of them about their gang, they would deny the existence. Oh, we broke it up. Too much bullshit with the police. But one guy hinted around like, "We are still a gang, we just like, a secret gang. You mean like, you guys get together on the weekends, drink Mad Dog 2020, and listen to gangster rap, hard faking cordude." One of the more prominent members went on to be a star employee at our local Radio Shack. He had the initials of the gang tattooed on his forearm in an old English font .R.N.C. Roughneck Crew, although I'm sure by now he tells people it's Republican National Committee. Yeah, I'm really big on politics and cheat. Obama in 2013 dog. Well, this isn't a gang, but certainly a story about a badass thug. Where I went to school was pretty middle class white. However, there was one part of town that was kind of rough as it butted up against the rougher town right next to us. There was a kid that went to my school that was a senior when I was a sophomore. He was honestly probably the biggest badass in my school. He was about 6'2", 240 pounds. He was all muscle, and in high school he already had a body filled up with prison-style tattoos. I know he had spent some time in juvie. One day from a distance I saw some other typical white thug kids kind of taunting a kid with obvious mental handicap issues. I couldn't quite tell what was going on though. A few seconds later I see the actual only badass I went to HS with come over and grab one of the guys. I hear him tell the kid to go pick up his faking cars. The kids kind of scramble and I see they are picking up Hot Wheels all over the locker bay. He then makes the kids apologize to the handicapped kid. They had been kicking his Hot Wheels around the locker bay while he tried to play with them. The mean kids leave, and I see the badass guy start talking to the kid about Hot Wheel cars. The rest of the school year the badass kid would bring Hot Wheels in for the handicapped kid. They would trade Hot Wheels, talk about Hot Wheels, buy each other Hot Wheels and even play with the Hot Wheels on the lunch tables. He spent so much time hanging out with this kid and his Hot Wheels. It was one of the most badass things I have ever seen. 25 years ago I was a door-to-door encyclopedia salesman. It's 4th of July. I'm in Cleveland. Mentor on the lake to be precise. Boss is pissed because the crew wasn't selling sheet, so he makes us work on 4th of July. I get dropped in a neighborhood about 3 blocks from the lake and I start knocking on doors. I'm working my way down the street knocking on doors. Nobody home, mostly and then I turn the corner and I can see where everyone is. Big house with a huge backyard and nothing but hollies. Probably 25 to 50 of them lined up, and it's the whole cookout, roast pig thing happening. Now in hindsight the whole scene was pretty chill. The wives and kids are all there. No gunfire or play in sight. Just the same. There's no way in hell am I knocking on this door. I'm doing my best to walk by and be invisible. Wasn't happening. Hey you. Of course it's the biggest barrel-chested dude in leather I've ever seen. He looked like he could throw a damn Harley at me. Hell, he looked like he just got done eating a Holly. And he's looking right at me. Me. Yeah you. Come. Here, you sure you mean me? I'm looking all around and behind me. The street is empty boy. Don't make me come over this fence. Get the fuck over here. Okay. So I walk over. Hi. What the fuck are you doing in my neighborhood? Okay. Now I think I just peed myself a little. I'm like a door-to-door salesman, you know, no sheet mister. Slacks and shirt and tie with a faking backpack walking around my neighborhood. What the fuck are you selling? Encyclopedias and kids books. Sir really? Yes. And I open my bag and haul out a book and hand it to him. He takes it and he's flipping through the pages and now he's talking to me. Real conversational like. You see all these wives sitting out here with all the rugrats running around now don't you? Yes. And you were just going to walk on by. Yes sir. You weren't going to knock on our door. No. No sir. Are you sure? Yes. Positive. Yes. Well why the fuck not? He growls from assorted pit bulls and Rottweilers who had suddenly showed up because the word was out. Come see what sheet your pants fear smells like. Okay. Now I'm faking positive. I've pissed myself. He snaps the book shut. Or I'm just faking with you dude. And with that he hollers over his shoulder. Hey, anyone wanna buy some faking encyclopedias and kids books and sheet? And from the circle of wives, a voice spoke up. What you got? And the dude turns back and says, see that? You're in. Jump the fence dude. 10 seconds later I have a chair and a beer and a dozen bikers wives all leaning forward to see what I've got. What makes the story even better is that I did actually write a deal and then they wouldn't let me leave until my boss showed up to pick me up. And the roast pig was amazing. They fed me and fed me some more and everyone said goodbye when I left. No kidding. Nicest people ever. First, some background. My dad has always been a little strange. He was a highly respected therapist for a number of years, but recently he has taken more of an interest in the arts. In tandem, he has always been slightly oblivious to everything around him. He'll often use phrases incorrectly, not think before he speaks, etc. Okay, so a few years ago, our family came into a bit of money, and my dad got a hold of the credit card before anyone else. I don't know what he was thinking, but he purchased a club in a more unsavory neighborhood that specialized in drag queen shows. He was able to get an amazing price because the neighborhood was so bad. Naturally, everyone in the family was furious. Anyways, the first people he encountered while inspecting the property and surrounding areas were what he assumed to be a street gang, but were, in fact, a group of homosexual dancers. My dad, being the considerate man that he is, brought them into the club and taught them to dance, believing that he had just converted an inner city gang. They then went outside to convert more gang members to the song and dance lifestyles, and promptly had the sheet kicked out of them by a bunch of Mexicans. But that fake homosexual gang gave my dad hope that he was pursuing the right path. TLDR, homosexual dance gang teach my dad the wrong lesson. My uncle tells the story of when he was a young teenager. He and a friend in Cancton, Louisiana in the early 70s found an old motorcycle off the road with a bunch of other junk, like refrigerators, etc. They took it home, and for months were working on it, trying to get it running, saving up money or things to barter for parts, used tires and such. It had no muffler, and once they got it running they would roll it down to the parish line and ride it up and down the fields out there. It was so loud that the farmers ended up calling the sheriff after a few weeks, and he busted them walking the bike back after a ride. With no title, no license, and a strong fear of my grandfather finding out they had it and had been spending money on it. They were quite poor at the time. The sheriff said he had to tell my grandfather, but also had an idea. 2 days later the sheriff pulls up to the farm in the morning, and behind him is about 13 to 14 bandits. Sheriff tells my grandfather that his son has been fixing up a motorcycle and riding it illegally. When my grandfather starts to get upset, one of the bandits asks to see the bike. My uncle and his friend take him to where they hide it, and several of the bandits inspect the work, are impressed they got it running, show them things that were put on backwards or wasn't aligned. Apparently the forks were very delicate to align, and they brought a tool to do it, and they spent the day fixing this bike and getting it street ready. Once it's done, one of the bandits is alone with my uncle in the barn, crouches down, tells him he did a damn fine job fixing that bike, and hands him an envelope with $500 in it. He says the money is not for the bike, but for the labor. The MC rides the bike out, and my uncle foolishly thinks if he shows that his hard work in getting the motorcycle fixed was of value because of the money, that my grandfather will be less upset. When he tells them about the money, my grandmother says, "Praise the Lord. I prayed and prayed for the Lord to help out this family, and he delivered the help we needed." Took the money from my uncle and never mentioned it again. My uncle never rode a motorcycle again. I grew up in a city of about 34,000 give or take. Haven't been back in a few years, and it was slashes taking a turn for the worse with Bloods and LK. This is in central Illinois, so neither are very intimidating, but have both been known to do drive-bys and shootings. But we had a biker club called Sons of Silence, scariest guys I have ever met. They still believed in shooting someone, or at least beating someone horribly for disrespecting family or members. I grew up going to the bars with my family, and we were friends with a lot of the SOS members, so I pretty much got through high school and middle school without ever being jumped, even though I was a scrawny white guy with shoulder-length blonde hair. But time for an actual story. I was walking home from school one day in 4th grade carrying a huge poster board for a project. The poster was probably bigger than me, and it was a really windy day. I was having a lot of trouble carrying it with me, and decided to take a shortcut through the back of a gas station to stop the wind. Well, behind the gas station there were a few bikers relaxing after stopping to get something to drink. One asked what I was doing, so I told him, and he offered to help me home. I thanked him for it, and he carried the poster for me all the way home, while asking about how I was doing in school. And when we got to my house he told me I had to stay in school and get good grades. Best advice I've gotten from the most random of places. I had just arrived at a nearby grocery store on a fall afternoon. Everything seemed normal as I got out of my car. However, when I reached the end of the parking lot and looked at the store, I spotted them. There were 5 or 6 gang members standing in front of store's entrance. They all looked young, but they definitely had the attire of a fairly large gang in the nearby area: hats, shirts, pants, etc. As I approached them, I was repeating to myself in my head, "Don't make eye contact. Don't make eye contact." I must have repeated that a dozen times. Luckily, as one of the boys starts to approach me, a lady hastily walked towards the store and caught his attention. Along with the other gang members, the gang members started to initiate a conversation with the lady. As they talked about something, I did not really listen. I just wanted to quickly go past them. I sped up to go into the store, barely escaping their grasp. Once I finished my shopping, the hard part came: going back to my car. I planned ahead and only bought things I could carry in the plastic bags. The cart was too big of a risk. Regrettably, I bought 1 or 2 more things than what I could comfortably handle. So as I started approach the exit, I could feel something about to fall out of the bag. I go through the automatic doors and made eye contact with one of them. I quickly look away, and in my head I'm cursing at myself for making such a foolish mistake. The gang member that I had made eye contact with started to approach me and said something. I ignored him and rapidly walked to my car. It is no use. The boy is still walking towards me saying something. I speed up even more, and then I hear something fall from one of my bags. For a split second I contemplate on what to do. Ultimately, I decide it is a lost cause and continue my fast walk to my car. The boy is still on my tail. I finally reach my car, but with my hands full I cannot reach into my pockets for the car keys. I quickly drop the groceries from one of my hands to get the keys. I fumble the keys around trying to stick into the lock as I hear the boy's footsteps getting louder and louder until nothing. As I unlock the door, I look to my right and see the boy standing there with a smirk on his face, holding my sacrifice grocery item. I'm terrified inside and thinking the worst. Then to my surprise he comes closer to me and says, "Mister, you dropped this." I hesitantly say thanks, thinking that there was nothing to fear. I grab the item and start putting my groceries away. As I finish, I noticed the boy still there, and right then he says something along the lines of, "Hi, I'm from Boy Scout Troop 100 selling popcorn to raise money to go to summer camp. Would you like to buy some? TLDR. They are after your money." I was about 15 years old at the time when I went to a liquor store in Pasadena, California with my buddy that looks like a Charlo but wasn't one. Drunk as all hell, we stumble into the store for a sober drink since we were too trashed to drink anything else. As I'm perusing the Born mags, I hear my friend let out a quat or sheet. I notice 4 Charlos outside staring at us while talking to each other. I know that look they're giving us. For some reason gangsters tend to be intimidated or feel threatened when in my friend's presence, even when he's not doing anything. Now I've seen my friend in action in our old backyard boxing matches, but he had a one-hit knockout punch in his ass, so I wasn't too afraid for him. I was more afraid for myself, since I was way too drunk to fight. So since we know what's about to happen, he tells me to buy a drink with a glass bottle. I do so, and as we are stepping out of the store we hear those infamous words, "Where you from?" "Eats, great, we're being hit up. No turning back, now it's on." "We are from nowhere," my boy says. They reply with a, "Nah, fuck that, you're in our hood homes. Villa boys, you two faggots." Awesome. Well, if it's gonna go down, then here we go. As I'm getting ready to throw, 3 Lowrider cars come up next to us. Great, I thought, more of them to fight. But as I thought that, I notice the people in the Lowriders are black. One jumps out with a police nightstick and yells, "Where y'all beaches from? Cuz ABC Altadena Block Crips CUHZ." My friend and I look at each other, smile and tell them we ain't from nowhere, but these punks are from Villa boys. God, the look on their faces, priceless. Oh okay, good looking, cuz as a matter of fact we been searching for them. They tell us, "Y'all wanna fuck 'em up with us." We keep their wallets though, cuz as all 3 Lowriders unload their passengers, about 12 to 14, me and my friend look at each other, laugh, say no, check my pants for defecation, and went about our night. I used to work as a caretaker for an old home in a pretty sketchy neighborhood. The place had historical value. It was an old manor home, but had been let go to rot along with the rest of that neighborhood. This husband and wife lawyer team wanted to get the place protected as a historical landmark, but they needed me to oversee its reconstruction and maintenance while they worked their regular jobs. The neighborhood had a few different gangs, but by far the saddest of them was this group of homeless kids who would sneak into homes to steal food for themselves and their pet dog. Personally, I was fine looking the other way, but a lot of others accuse them of being irresponsible druggies who always seem to have cash for weed. Just to be clear, I never saw them do any drugs. It was mostly rumor. Most construction crews refused to work in my neighborhood because of the gangs, so we were stuck with these local dumb fucks who had only just found enough brain cells to be subpar day laborers instead of gangbangers. None of them knew shit about restoring old homes, but they worked for next to nothing, and they were our only option point. So one day, the foreman, a dude who really didn't deserve the title, comes up to me to say that the crew is refusing to work. They think the house is haunted. College does not prepare you for trying to reassure superstitious Charles that ghosts don't exist, and not all rundown houses are trying to murder you like in the movies. I've got the lawyers on one side breathing down my neck to get this job done, or they'll have to demolish the place, and a total work stoppage on the other end because of mystical spirits or some shit point. Now, in come these burnt out teenage hobos who somehow show up just as the sheet's going down, and they've got some sob story for me about their car breaking down. From what I'd heard, that was their usual trick: make up a sob story to get in the house, then steal your food. I guess they just saw a fancy old house and figured we'd be loaded with things to steal. I went ahead and explained the whole situation to them. I hadn't had a chance to vent or pet a dog in a while, and it felt good to indulge. When I finished talking, one of the kids out of the blue promises that they'll fix it for me and gets his friends to go along with him. Point the next day, the kids had actually caught the ghost the female lawyer was trying to scare off the construction crew so she could buy out her husband's share of the property, demolish it, and build affordable housing for low-income families. The crazy beach probably would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for those meddling kids. I took my SATs in Newark on June 2nd because I signed up late. It was either Newark or the Bronx, and I live in Essex County, so Newark it was. Throughout the exam, 3 black kids dressed with red bandanas, Chicago Bulls jerseys, and baggy carpenter jeans were joking, laughing, and generally being disruptive. Why they were even taking the test in the first place is a mystery to me. Anyway, after the exam was over, they stood up, looked at each other, and walked towards me. Now, I know I shouldn't have been wearing my white gold Faravaha necklace in Newark, but my grandfather sent it to me from Iran and it's my good luck charm. Anyway, one of them saw it poking out of my button-down shirt and smiled and said, "I shit you not, this is exactly how he said it. Yo nigga, that's some serious bling you got on. Look real expensive shit." His friends simply nodded in agreement. I explained to them what it was, and the same guy replied with, "Zoro what? The fact that?" After explaining the fundamentals of Zoroastrianism, not to convert them or anything, just to explain to the Three Bloods members, the guy said it was the same guy every time. The other two didn't talk. Dat some dope as shit, nigga. I mean, we be Nation of Islam, ya heard? But I'm digging dat ancient shit. I might look into it someday. Yo, chain looking real good, my man. You should probably take it off and keep it in yo pocket. Awesome shit word. Don't want nothing to happen to it. Bad neighborhood and shit. Stay true, nigga. The main guy tilted his head in a beckoning motion and the three of them promptly left. Cool guys. Glad they didn't mug me. I got lost in my hometown one night, all by my lonesome. I'm not terribly scared to be out on my own in my hometown, since most of the violence that happens there is gang related or domestic disputes, and I've got nothing to do with those. But I do get scared when I get lost on my own, because if I can't find my way home, it means I have to call my dad or brother for directions. When it's late and I wake up my dad, sometimes he's angry and yells, but usually he's cool, but his directions are vague as fuck. Now, my brother, He knows how to give directions that I can understand, using landmarks rather than cardinal directions and street names, but he used to be merciless when he teased me about anything, so merciless that I was, in fact, terrified of ever having to rely on him to help me with anything from homework to coming to pick me up from a dangerous part of the city point after 45 minutes of trying to find my way back with no luck, and getting increasingly frustrated and worried that I'll have to call my brother. I run into a gang. I'm no great beauty because I'm overweight, and most men won't hit on me in front of their friends, so I wasn't afraid of getting hit on or touched. I was obviously poor, all my clothes were old and ratty, my shoes had holes in them. They knew it wasn't worth the trouble of mugging me, so I wasn't worried about that either. To be honest, I'm not usually afraid of gang members. When you grow up around gangs, you learn how to go unnoticed by them. Be respectful, and don't act like a target, and there you go. They've got more pressing matters to attend to than faking with someone who isn't going to be any fun. So, I figured they'd just leave me alone. Instead, one of them sees my face, which at this point is on angry face mode, and I'd been crying a bit out of frustration. So, he stops the whole gang and says, "Hold up girl, why are you crying? Someone be Javin you sheet. Cause this is our road and we don't abide by no one faking with no girls that be out on their own." Yes, just like that. I explained the situation, telling them about my brother, and one of the other guys says, "Man, that ain't cool. You his little sister, he ought to be protecting you. We'll get you home, girl, don't you worry about calling him." I was floored. Seriously. I know a lot of gang members. Most of the time they're really pleasant people thrown into really unpleasant circumstances. Still, they have reputations to uphold. Gang culture is a serious faking subculture. They don't often go out of their way to help someone in distress. If they did, people wouldn't be so upset when gangs come into their cities. But those guys walked me all the way back to where I needed to be, which was about an hour's walk in the opposite direction. They even offered to walk me all the way home. I said I was cool on my own from that point, and thanked them, and one of them told me to make sure I was paying attention to where I was going, so I didn't get lost again, because you don't know what kinda creeps be out this late at night. And the one who commented about my brother earlier told me to tell my parents about my brother being a jerk, because somebody ought to talk to that boy and be reminding him he's got a duty to his little sister. I don't ever treat my little sister so bad she'd be walking out here alone, rather than calling me to come get her. I thought that was very sweet. The whole thing was just surreal. Early 90s and Thika is at the forefront of the rap scene. Listening to it, and dressing in starter pinstripe outfits in town. Embracing the whole scene. Probably one of the only white kids around who was into it. Started hanging with some guys who were GDs, Chicago gang, gangster disciples, in the folk family, and man did I want to join. Now there was this one dude named Big Syed. He was a dealer, had a ton of girlfriends, must have been in his late 20s. I finally told him that I want to associate and be down for the GDs. He looks at me, serious as death, and tells me something I have never forgotten. "Tariqa man, you don't want this. You want it now because you think it's cool, but when you are my age you aren't going to want it. You come from a good family, good home, and have people supporting you. Do something with that instead. You can be cool with us, and I'll let everyone know you are down, but I will also let everyone know that you are never going to be jumped in. You'll thank me one day." Now I was pissed at the time, but just nodded my head and said okay. Of course, like 2 years later, any interest I had in gangs was long gone. I always hoped I see him again one day and just say thanks. He was right. I never have seen him again, but if I ever do, I'm buying him a drink. A friend of mine lives in an area that can occasionally get sketchy, but is usually just a cool, predominantly Spanish neighborhood. She does, however, have a shit ton of dealers that like to hang out on her stoop in the summer and make it impossible to get into the building without having to go through them. Cue hard, somewhat suspicious stares, at least until I started geeking out on their sweet, custom RC cars. I ended up talking to them for 20 minutes, and every time I came by after that we chat a little about their tiny epic cars. So one day I'm walking down the block in the evening and this dude on a skateboard starts hassling me. First it's just standard catcalling, hey snowflake, hey slow down, I can make you feel good etc. Nothing really intimidating. When I don't respond the guy gets super hostile, starts trying to aggressively block my way, while saying really nasty, insulting shit point. Before I can do/say anything a small army of RC car loving drug dealers grabbed him from behind and knock his dumbass off of his skateboard with a what the fuck you say to her? I've never seen anybody run away so fast in my life like flaming roadrunner tracks down the street. They then apologized on behalf of the neighborhood and gave me his skateboard. Nicest dealers I know. TLDR, even hardcore drug dealers love to talk about their hobbies. My older brother had some connections with the local chapter of the club. When he passed, we were a little bit surprised that only a few of the members came to the memorial service, though upon departing the site we discovered why. Seems that about 100 of the local police force also chose to turn out for the service, locating themselves on a hill overlooking the spot where we had gathered. One attendee broke down and had a bit of a fit, shouting and swearing at the gathered PD members, screaming at them about respect for their member's mother and other family, and how they had absolutely zero class for doing such a thing at a memorial service point after the service. And for another year, until my mother died, the club members called on her 2 to 3 times a week to see if she needed anything, a grocery store run. She didn't drive, transportation to a doctor's appointment, or anything else. Occasionally one member would come to the door with a few flowers to cheer her up, and she often found things on her doorstep such as a potted plant, antique milk can. Like that point the only issue mom ever had with the club members was in their riding their bikes down the walkway in the apartment. They would roll through, stopping the bike in front of her door. She asked one of the members to please not do that, as she did not want to disturb the other tenants, some of whom worked nights. After that, no more bikes in the breezeway. It was the day after I graduated from Army basic training, and I had about 4 or 5 hours to spare before my flight left, so I decided to get my first tattoo. I was in Columbia, South Carolina, so the taxi driver took me to a tattoo shop on the USC campus. It wasn't a dirty shop, and it seemed pretty nice actually. Well, I'm a smoker, and I had just gone a solid 10 weeks without slowly killing myself, so I had to break down and walk to the store and get my cancer. Oh, and I'm in my full army uniform, because I had no other civilian clothes, except the dirty wrinkled ones that had been in the bottom of my bag locked away since the day I got to basic. Anyways, I walk back to the shop and I see one of the scariest motherfuckers I've ever seen. It was a Hell's Angel, and he had the vest on and everything. Tattoos all over his body, including teardrop tattoos on his face and a 1% patch tattoo right on his throat over his Adam's apple. If you don't know what a 1% patch is, it's just a patch that says 1%er on it, and members of the gang wear the patch on their vests and whatnot. He wasn't your generic leather wearing biker though. He had a pair of Nikes on and long dicky shorts, but still a big scary dude. The guy goes outside, and I sit there for a bit, then decide to go out and smoke a cigarette and maybe talk to the guy for a second. I walked out front and immediately realized the guy is smoking a joint and playing with a pair of brass knuckles he had in his pocket and occasionally fiddling with the longest knife he had hanging off his belt. Still, I walked up to him and just started talking. Remember, I was in uniform, so the topic of the military easily came up. He told me how he really wanted to go in the army, but got sent to jail and got wrapped up in the Hells Angels, and that it pretty much ruined him having a chance at anything else in life. He kept thanking me and saying how much respect he has for people in the military, and then we got to talking about the Hells Angels and he just explained to me what they do. Not all the details of course, but he hinted at things which was kind of funny I guess, and where he was from, and where I was from and all that. The point is that overall he was a cool guy to talk to for a bit. At one point a lady came up and said to him, "Is that your car in that parking spot over there? If it is, I'm having it towed because it's in my spot." The lady must have had some balls talking like that to him, but he just said, "No ma'am, it isn't." And when she walked away he turned to me and said, "I dare that beach to tow my bike. I'll have a prospect come down here and slit her throat." Speaking of my bike though, do you want to see it? Of course I was taken aback for a second, but I shrugged it off and went to look at his bike, which was just freaking amazing. It was a beautiful bike and he explained it all to me and let me touch it even. Haha. Overall it was just cool, because how many people can say that they had a good experience like that with a random Hell's Angel? Oh, and towards the end of my tour the taxi driver had still not shown up, and we were running really late on time because the tattoo took about 3 hours, and the guy was just like, "Don't worry man, if the guy doesn't show up I'll throw you on the back of my bike and get you there right on time." I'm not gonna lie, I really hope the taxi driver wouldn't show up, because that would have been a kicker's ride, and not a lot of people can say they rode with a Hell's Angel, but the dude ended up showing up. TLDR, met and talked to / hung out with a Hell's Angel while getting a tattoo. He was cool as hell despite the fact he would have had a random lady killed. Offered to give me a ride on his bike, but it didn't work out. We were staying in a rundown motel in Nelson, BC about 5 years ago. Maybe more. It's 1 in the morning, and a group of Hell's Angels pull up outside, switch on the radios on their bikes and proceed to begin drinking and partying outside the motel. I'm 16 years old, super skinny, but damn it we have driving to do in the morning. Me, my mom, dad and sister. I shove my shoes on with no socks, throw a hoodie on over my t-shirt, and walk out in my Homer Simpson boxers I'm sleeping in. Several of the bikers are drunk and have their backs to me, yelling, holding beer bottles, most with long hair, leather vests, and their bikes parked in a circle. I stand there for a second, screwing up my courage, and one of them sort of notices me and tips his head up as if to say, "Sup?" So I walk up to him and pluck up my courage to say, "Hey man, how you doing? Listen, my family and I have got to do a lot of driving in the morning. Do you think you could turn it down a little bit? If not, that's totally cool." He responds rather blankly, "Yeah sure, I'll turn it down." I thank him profusely as I trip backwards over myself to get back in the door and slide back under the covers. Through the cheap screen window I can hear voices. "What the fuck? Why'd you turn the music off? Some dude came out. Oh god, I'm about to be killed by Hell's Angels in my boxers. This is how I die." "He told you to turn it off?" "No, he just asked to turn it down, and then there was sort of some more talking, and they didn't break the door down and kill us, so that was the nicest thing any bikers have ever done for me." This will probably get buried, but when I was in high school we had a new kid on the first day in school. He was a junior like me and transferred from a school not too far away, but it was in a far worse neighborhood. This guy was queer as fuck. I know because my gay brother said he was queer as fuck. He wore short Daisy Dukes and tiny body wrapping shirts. His hair was chin length, dyed red, and cut like a girl's. Now that I think about it, he reminds me a lot of Sacha Baron Cohen's Bruno. He hung out in the smoking section of the school with all the other misfits, such as myself, and none of us had any problems with him. After all, he was a really cool guy. But that's not to say that the rest of the school was so accepting. He got teased a lot that first week. In fact, they started coming into the smoking section in the mornings before class to start cheat with him. Then one day 4 Mexican kids that I have never seen before, 3 vatos and 1 girl, showed up. They looked completely thugged out, lock sunglasses, baggy dockers, wife beaters, brown plaid long sleeve shirts, you name it. They went over to the new kid, and I thought they were gonna fuck him up. I kept my distance as they talked, and then the bullies came in for their daily teasing. The Mexican mini gang then turned and yelled to everyone, "This guy here is from a hood, and if anyone messes with him, they messing with us." Turns out that the new guy grew up his whole life in his old neighborhood and had a lot of great friends from all walks of life. When word got back that he was being teased, this gang came and stood up for him. He was never faked with a gang. I'm pretty late to the party, but this one time me and my friends were transporting a bunch of rifles around in our vehicle. It was completely legal. We had a few shotguns and a lot of ammo. Hunters, you know. Anyway, at one point we left our vehicle to go to a gas station. While we were gone, a bunch of these guys broke into our trunk and stole all of the weapons we were possessed, and all we had were a crossbow, 1 shotgun, and a revolver. That didn't stop us. We were trolling around town trying to find our weapons, cause fuck the police, and we came across one of their younger guys doing I don't know what, selling crack on the corner or something. Well, we tackle this kid and his buddies see us. So we take off down this alleyway with this little punk and disappear, and his home is just drive off in a hurry. So then we get a bright idea. The kid, for our guns. Mind you, it's middle of the day and there were people absolutely everywhere, so it was hard keeping this kid quiet while we sneaked around town through alleys and such. To make a long story short, we find where his gang is holed up. Their leader comes out, shit gets tense. Everyone has our weapon drawn, and over my left shoulder my buddy with the crossbow has their leader pegged. Then out of nowhere this little old lady comes out from behind all these gangsters telling them to stop. Turns out this group of good for nothings was caring for a whole nursing home in this town, and their leader was a nurse, so we let them keep half the guns cause otherwise the zombies might kill them all. They were pretty good guys. This will get buried, but here goes. I lead my company's outreach program to a local employment academy that is connected with the homeless shelter. Essentially, this place will take in people that are either homeless or recently paroled and give them life skills training, education, and job placement assistance. I have been going monthly to serve dinner for about 5 years now. At a certain point, I began mentoring one of the guys in the program who was on probation for drug convictions but had nowhere to go when he was paroled. He had been trending wonderfully in his recovery and we became really good friends. After some time, his behavior became increasingly erratic, but he seemed to be holding it together with a job and nothing seemed to raise glaring red flags. Fast forward to a night near Christmas, and he was lamenting not being able to afford a cell phone to call a girl he was interested in dating. He had lost his previous cell phone. Well, not lost in hindsight, and I offered to take him to get a prepaid as a Christmas gift. He seemed happy, and I dropped him back in the community housing where he had been placed after successfully meeting many of the marks in the program. It was in a rough part of town, Baltimore. If anyone is curious, about a week later, it was the first snowstorm of the season and I'd get a text from his number at about 11:30 at night. It said, "If anyone know, name redacted, call this number. Emergency." So I immediately called it back, and a man answered that was definitely not the guy I had been mentoring. I asked what the problem was, and he just said, in between the pronounced sniffing of a person under the influence of cocaine, he needs help. He's out here in the snow trying to sell his shoes for another hit. I know he's in recovery. He needs help. He then proceeded to tell me about all of this guy's relapse and tied up a lot of loose ends for me. A really informative and surprisingly cohesive conversation for someone obviously severely coked up. As it turns out, the man who called me was the neighborhood drug dealer. He had been feeding crack cocaine to the guy I mentored all night, but he knew he was in over his head and needed to get help. He texted everyone in his phone, and I was apparently the only one that responded. I called the director of the program that oversaw his recovery and let them know what was going on. The calls did not stop, however. I got calls for several days after informing me that I could come down to Washington Boulevard and buy the phone back since you bought it. I finally made it clear that I was not interested in this scenario. I look back on it and I'm amazed at the relative humanity of an inner city drug dealer to consider the well-being of an own recovering drug addict in the middle of an aggressive relapse. Had he not called me, I don't know where the guy would be today. TL. Doctor, a Baltimore City drug dealer called me to tell me the formerly homeless man I had been mentoring was relapsing and needed help. From when I was very little, my dad, a recovered drug addict, had been mates with a well-known bike gang. Never a member, but they respected him, and he respected them. A few even refused to talk to him until he became straight because they knew I was in his care and I was only 7 at the time. They used to come around to our house and bring me food, and on my 8th birthday 2 members brought me some coloring in books and textus as well as an outfit one of their wives brought for me. When my dad became sober and finally told some of his mates why I had gone into his care and was no longer with my biological mother and stepfather, this was when I was about 14, the vice president of a certain group bent down to eye level with me and looked me in the eye and promised me that I would never be hurt like that again and that they would not be allowed to step foot in their area again. He then proceeded to show me a patch he had received for saying hello to another pedophile. who had abused his daughter on a camp, and how no child should ever fall victim to a weak rock spider's cruel spirit. I'm 22 now, and they check in every now and then. They were there the day I walked out of court, after taking my stepfather to court, and they applauded me for my strength, and reminded me that, if ever I was in need, or hurt or anything I could call on them, and they would help. I have never felt more respected, or welcome, and they are some of the nicest people I have ever met. I'm forever thankful for the support and help they have given me. Not a personal story, but a family story involving the Al Capone. We have the family story written down somewhere from one of those oral historians. Tell your story and they write it down for you, in Michigan, but I'm going to do my best from memory. My great-great-grandmother was living in the Chicago area and was a house cleaner for someone she knew as very wealthy. One time, she was unable to leave my great-grandmother with anyone for the day, so he had to bring her along. She was told to be a good girl and not touch anything. Later on, another little girl showed up at the house and invited my great-grandmother to play dolls with her. As my great-great-grandmother finished up, she didn't know where her daughter went. She eventually found her playing with the other little girl and scolded her for touching anything. Two gentlemen who were meeting walked in from another room and both assured my great-great-grandmother that it was alright. One nudged the other, who is suspected of being the father to the little girl, and suggested to the other that they give my great-grandma the doll she was playing with. It was then that my great-great-grandma realized who the one that nudged the other was. She refused and they both insisted. My great-great-grandma never returned to that cleaning job, afraid of what she may have gotten pulled into. But my great-grandma left with a very nice doll, and not knowing till much later that she met Al Capone and played dolls with one of his men's daughters again. Kinda fuzzy since I haven't read the record in about 5 or 6 years, but that's the best I can remember. Wow, there are some pretty amazing stories in here. Here's mine. Growing up it was always just my sister, mother and me. My mom would always work late, so my sister would watch me all the time. She was 4 years older than me and hung out with a pretty rough crowd. We are Hispanic/white, but she hung out with mostly black people and Hispanics. I would always come home from school and there would be a group of people at our house, drinking, partying etc. I didn't have a dad, so I looked up to these older gangster dudes and they kinda showed me the ropes. Scarface, Ninja Scroll, let me touch their girlfriend's boobs after they were passed out drunk. When I got to high school all of my sister's friends were seniors. She didn't go to that particular school anymore but all her friends still did. One day at lunch some big jockey lacrosse player dude who was an upperclassman was giving me shit, pushing me around and saying I couldn't wear a backwards hat because that was his thing. I was scared shitless and tried to be passive, but then he took a plastic knife and cut me pretty bad on my neck. I was in shock. I started bleeding and tearing up and didn't know what to do. After lunch I was still distraught and was rushing to class, trying to avoid crying. I bumped into one of my sister's big black friends, Tony, and he asked what was wrong. I explained what happened. He told me to go to class and he would take care of it. I went to BO and was sitting there, still scared and confused. Out of nowhere the door opens and Tony is there with a group of his big badass friends and the kid who attacked me. They basically told the teacher to stop lecturing and they needed to talk to me. In front of the whole class they made him apologize to me and he went on a rant about how he really just wanted to hang out with me and invited me to be on the lacrosse team. I will never forget the cracking of his voice as he tried not to tear up out of fear in front of a class of 14-year-olds. After that no one faked with me. Now Tony is living in a halfway house as he just got out of jail on a gun charge. The halfway house was about an hour from where I got my undergrad from, so I would visit him from time to time to catch up. I've got another Hells Angels story for you. When I lived in Albania a few years ago, my favorite bar in Tirana was called Steel Wings. I was a regular, and lots of rockers and bikers congregated there. What I didn't realize was the HA affiliation. So one day, a huge party full of 1%s from the Las Vegas and Luxembourg chapters, the FAC, Luxembourg, comes to town. Literally hundreds of people came to the party, and I wound up shooting the sheet with some of the angels, since I'm an American who once lived in Luxembourg. Common ground all around. It was great, and we shared pizza and beer. It was getting late, almost to the end of the party. I start to walk home, and some meathead decides he wants to sell me phone credit by threatening me. I'm a skinny little guy. He punches me right in the center of the chest, knocking the wind out of me. I stumble back, running into a Vegas chapter 1%er I'd just been hanging out with, and as I fell I knocked the beer out of his hands and onto him. I look him in the eye absolutely mortified, and he just says to me, "I saw everything, buddy, don't worry," and he proceeds to grab 2 other angels immediately nearby, and they faked that dude up. I got us all around afterward to thank him, and they wound up giving me a ride to my house. Fuck yeah, I got to ride with the Hells Angels. I went to a relatively poor high school. My senior prom was held at a venue in the same plaza as a Big Lots and a Dollar General. Let's just say it was in a not so nice area. After the dance my date and I stopped by a nearby gas station to fill up. I went inside for a minute to go to the restroom. I go back to the car only to find out that my date had locked my keys inside my car. He thought he was being considerate by locking the doors before he went into the store. It was already 2 AM and the gas station was pretty desolate. I didn't want to call my overprotective Asian parents to help me, and I didn't have AAA. I asked the store owner to help, but he seemed reluctant to leave his bulletproof enclosing. By this time I'm freaking out. The area I was in was notorious for drive-by, and since I dressed nicely, I knew I was going to attract attention. After nearly half an hour of waiting for AAA, a shady black van pulls up to the pump behind me. 2 large Hispanic guys come out covered in tattoos. They walk up to me and start looking me up and down. One of the guys comes up and says, "What's a pretty girl like you doing in a place like this?" To be honest, I was terrified, but I grew up with some rough kids and I knew that the outward appearance of confidence can command a lot of respect. I looked him in the eye and then pointed at my date and told him that my date had locked my car keys inside and we didn't have anything to break into my car with. The other guy comes up and says he has some tools in the car. He takes out a flat piece of metal and a crowbar. They ask me if I needed help. I said, "No thanks, I can handle it from here." I take the crowbar and wedge it into my front door and slide the flat metal piece in and pop open the lock. I'm a tiny Asian girl and I think they weren't expecting me to know how to break into a car. My dad had taught me how when I started driving, since he thought it would be a useful skill. While this is going on, my date is standing sweating like crazy. He looked terrified and hadn't said a word for an hour. Anyhow, both guys were like, "Damn," after I smoothly popped open the door. I gave them back their tools and thanked them and asked why they were carrying those tools around. Turns out they were part of the Latin Kings and they were planning to steal my car and money. They would carry around those tools because they make a living stealing luxury cars. We had some friendly conversation, and it turns out they were pretty nice people. Beside the stealing part, they decided not to steal my money and my car because they thought it was really cool that I knew how to break into cars. I think it's because my car was really shitty. TLDR, locked my car keys in car during prom. Members of the Latin Kings helped me break into my car. Not a gang in the traditional sense. However, I play league pool at a local bar on Wednesdays. I'm a tall, scrawny, nerdy white guy. I work in it, look the part, and don't intimidate anyone. The closest league location is a bar in a shady part of town. Shady enough that the bartenders carry cattle prods and are big mean looking mothers. One night I'm getting ready to head over, and I just got done detailing my car. An AMG Mercedes. The bar has 2 entrances to the parking lot, and 99% of the patrons head to the south entrance. Well, that day someone stopped for the north entrance. I got stuck behind this person, and knew it was a bad choice. It's a 4-lane road with no turn lane, and we are blocking the left. The right is solid traffic, so I can't get around. I put on my signal, and hope for the best. Next thing I hear is a screeching noise. I looked in my mirror just before impact and had time to sigh before I got plowed into by a junky old Camry. Person in front of me turns. I make eye contact with the offending driver in my mirror and shoot my hand through the sunroof. First pointing at him, then pointing left at the parking lot. He just nodded and followed me in. We park, and begin looking at the damage. It's bad for him, meh for me. Turns out the body shop had to replace my rear impact beam. It deflected by over an inch. I insist on swapping info, and this kid starts to squirm and get washy, saying that he has a parts car and I can just report my car to my insurance. No faking way, dude. I raise my voice in an attempt to shake him. He's sticking to his guns at this point. The bar patrons had been taking a smoke break, saw the whole thing, and started surrounding the kid. And these guys are all big, tattooed, bald, intimidating looking fellows. I was so dazed I never saw them. The leader of the opposing team that night speaks up and asks me if I need any help. All of a sudden the kid who hit me is scribbling down his insurance info and telling me all of his contact info too, just in case. We shake hands. His info was legit, and my car gets fixed with little hassle on my part. Rental was even paid for. He never called my insurance. The opposing team bought me drinks all night, and we had a good game. I have never felt intimidated since then going to that bar. We still laugh about it every once in a while. TLDR. Got rear-ended by kid who refuses to core up info. Angry, intimidating bar patrons who witnessed Rex scare kid into complying. I'm pretty late to this, but oh well. I used to live in the same street as the leader of a reasonably well-known Australian bikie gang. These guys were the typical bikies and would make the news now and again for some sort of crime. Now the leader had moved into this house in my street to take care of his dying mother, I was told, and after she died, he renovated the house with an indoor pool, 2 double garages, etc., and basically made it into an awesome place. The gang would come roaring down the street every so often to meet at the leader's place. They would party and stuff and do what bikers do. However, these guys were some of the most considerate and genuine guys my young 10-year-old self had ever met. They took care of the whole street and made everyone feel safe. They would never party late and made sure they did not disturb anyone. They would come out and watch if we were having a game of street cricket during the summer or 44 home. Also, my neighbors and I used to play Spotlight in the park up the road when it was dark until about 10 PM, and they would sometimes check on us to see if we were safe. They also would do odd jobs around the place for our elderly neighbor, like changing light bulbs, throwing out old and heavy furniture, etc. I think every year some of the bikie gangs in my state do a ride for telethon/charity through the city just before Christmas and deliver toys to kids at the children's hospital. Also TLDR, lived in street with bikies, were genuine and helped out neighbors. Also do a telethon charity ride at Christmas to give toys to sick kids. Thanks for a refreshing read. It's good for the soul to know that kindness and respect can be found in seemingly the most unlikely places. Here's mine. A long time ago, girlfriend and I were taking our respective vehicles down to the airport, 45 minimum drive, to pick up her family who was coming into town for a visit. We park out on the street. I have not driven my car for a while, and when we got ready to leave for the airport, we found out that my car would not start. Just as I popped the hood, I noticed a sedan with a couple sitting inside drove by rather slowly, made eye contact with the driver, and gave him a nod and smiled. I have the habit of nodding at people, and smiling at them shows them that yes, I see them, and I acknowledge their presence. Once I popped the hood, we decided the battery is probably dead due to lack of use. As I went to my girlfriend's car, which was parked close to mine, to get jumper cables, I noticed the previous sedan pulling up behind us. Out hopped the driver with a car battery jumper, one of those that's self-powered and does not require a second vehicle, and came over to ask if I needed a jump, which I gratefully accepted. Car started right up, and the driver left quickly afterwards, but I did manage to shout a big heartfelt thank you as he drove away. To this day, his act of kindness is still fresh in my mind, and I try to pay it forward when I can. Well, Tupac once said the police are the biggest gang of them all. So I'll tell this story. I was in the ghetto of Seattle the other night around 3 in the morning, having some Asian food. I was with 3 other guys who walked out on the tab, and I left as well cause I didn't want to get stuck with their tab, even after waiting for someone to bring me a bill for a very long time and receiving the wrong order. So I decided to just walk out. A gang of pissed off Asians eventually grabbed me up the street, threw me into a wall then onto the ground, and held me down laying on top of my body dislocating my arm. A huge crowd started to form, as if someone had caught the white devil himself, and started to celebrate as I was laying the beat up over a $7 meal and the only white dude in sight. Eventually the cops showed up, and treated me like a total criminal as well in front of everybody, and did not take any statements from me or anything, and took me to a holding cell. I didn't say a word the whole time, even when people were spitting at me, and calling me a honky, and yelling "This nigga going to jail." When the arresting officer put me in the car I politely asked him if he could make sure one of his guys had my wallet cause it wasn't in my pocket. And then when we arrived I also asked him if he could help me fix my clothes that were coming off me, which he did. I apologized for bleeding all over the jail cell because I didn't realize I was bleeding. Then they took me to a sink and give me bandages for my cuts. Eventually he came in and said, "Your friends are here to pick you up. Your tab was paid. We just wanted to get you away from that crowd." Being polite to the police pays off. I did feel really bad for walking out of the restaurant through. People have been telling me I have grounds to sue, but my conscience can't handle it. I was dog sitting in a not so great neighborhood, and I take the dog for walks every night, going around the same 20-minute loop a few times. One night I was trying to kill off some energy, and had been around it a few times already. All of a sudden a couple guys come out from a backyard. They're only 2 or 3 yards ahead and just standing in my path looking at me. I turn to try to cross the street, and one of them comes forward and grabs my arm. I panicked but didn't know what to do, and he had a pretty good grip. The stupid dog is just sniffing some grass. Then it gets interesting. He told me I'd been around that loop 4 times, and another guy had followed the same exact path 3 times, always a block and a half behind me. Sure enough there's a guy down the street, walking very slowly in toward us. A few other guys came out from behind the garage. The one holding my arm lets go, but it didn't do me much good, because I was pretty much surrounded. The one who had been holding my arm and another guy took off toward the guy down the street, while I'm awkwardly standing there trying to decide whether I have any chance bolting. I realize they've all got the same tattoos, from a gang. I hadn't personally met anyone from the gang, but knew them to be on pretty bad terms with a guy I was close to. They had good reason, and the guy deserved all the enemies he had, but still, so that wasn't helping my fear any. The 2 guys down the street turned around to come back, and the other guy, who had apparently been following me, was going in the other direction. Everyone was silent. A guy who hadn't said anything before told me I could go now, but as I was walking away he stopped me again and said, "Next time you walk either take a knife or a bigger dog, and tell your mom you saw generic name going for a walk and he says hi. There's a picture of you on my Mars fridge. You look good, kid." I told my mom that, and it turns out she babysat him way back when I was a little kid, and she had an in-home daycare. I was only 5 or 6 at the time, but he'd seen one of my senior pictures that we sent his mom with a graduation invite, and remembered me. I also learned later, which is a long story, that the guy who'd been following me was a guy I'd gone to high school with who had some pretty serious mental issues. A few years before that I found him hiding in the woods behind my house, watching. Between that incident and him following me that night, he'd become a registered sex offender TLDR. I was being followed by a sex offender while walking a dog, and a bunch of guys who happened to be in a gang came to my defense because my mom used to babysit one of them. Edit. I did not spell a single thing wrong. Look at the text. I did not have to go back and correct anything. It's all spelled just fine. See? No bad spelling here. Looks like I'm too late to this party, but I'll tell the story anyways. One of my dad's best friends from college flips buildings in downtown Chicago. He'd buy up buildings and turn them into luxury condos and apartments. He had just bought this old building that had been vacant for years, and a local group of the Latin Kings had been squatting in the building. Now my dad's friend is a short guy, not very muscular, not intimidating whatsoever. He knew getting the gang out of his new building would take a lot of effort through the legal system, and that could take months. He also figured if he took the legal route the gang might trash his building. He wanted to get working on his building immediately. So one day, he buys several cases of beer and walks right in the front door to have a talk with the gang. He goes right in, offers them the cases of beer, and tells them his proposition. He said something along the lines of this: "Listen guys, I just bought this building, I make my living off of this, and I can't get the process moving with you guys living here. At a day of your choosing, I'll show up with a moving van and $500 and help you move all of your stuff out of here to wherever you want to go." My dad's friend and the gang finished off the cases of beer, and the gang agreed to his deal and really respected/admired his cojones. They were ready to move out of the building by the end of the week. TLDR, my dad's good college buddy who flips buildings in downtown Chicago had the Latin King squatting in one of his newly purchased buildings. Instead of a long legal battle to evict them, he walked in with a few cases of beer and offered to help them move out, to which they readily agreed to. When I was 16 and fairly street smart, or so I thought, a few friends and I were coming home from a rave at like 3 AM from a fairly unfriendly neighborhood. We're on a fairly safe train when we first get on, but at the first stop, a bunch of respectable people get off, or rather, safe looking people. No one looks respectable at 3 AM. We decided to stay on the train because the only other guy in a car, despite being dressed like a blood, was massively drunk to the point of being non-responsive. He's looking pretty sick, so we figure we could take him, despite his size, or at least run for our ass. After the next stop, he's looking even sicker, gagging a little. A short bumpy bit of track later, and he's puking everywhere, and gets a bunch on his nice jacket, which he looks devastated about. Being the nice person she is, one of my friends busts out from napkins she had in her bag from our food stop earlier that night, and tells me to get my water bottle out. Next thing I know, she's helping him clean off the jacket, and my other friend is even offering him gum to help with the pukey aftertaste. He's still pretty smashed, but gratitude is pretty evident on his face. While we're between the longest stops on our trip, some tough looking guys I'd now recognize as kings walk in from the next car. My friend lets out a fairly loud fuck, and the kings start laughing at him and come and stand in front of us, at which point we are all cheating our pants. Anna, the girl, is shaking really hard, and they are making some really lewd comments about her nice white ass. She starts to hyperventilate a little, and the thugs are enjoying her panic even more. After she lets out a little snobbish noise, the blood drunkenly lunges at one of the kings in a funny way, presumably trying to help. It looking really faking pointless, as if he was trying to punch the goon in the back with his hand still in his pocket. I'm planning how we'll make a break for it into the next car as the blood gets his ass kicked. Whatever it was though, it works, and one he bumped into nods his head at the car door really hard, and they hightail it out of there, at a pace that was pretty comical for guys in such low riding jeans. We get off at our stop, and he gets off at the same stop, obviously to transfer to the uptown train, since there's no way he lives where we did. Seeing him walk makes it pretty clear that the thing in his pocket was a gun, and we decided at that point that that train wasn't a good one to ride at 3 AM, or ever preferably. TLDR, helped out puking blood, he threatens to shoot kings who are faking with us. The Hells Angels in my city are some of the nicest people you could ever meet, if you get to know them through a family member as I did. My best friend's father is the treasurer of a big city chapter, and is a really hard-working American who pays his taxes, runs an excellent auto body shop, and is a really kind and compassionate person. Him and his brothers are extremely respectful and very protective of their friends, family, and property. If we, all American humans, could be so urbane in our personal lives, this country would surely become a utopia. The nicest thing I've seen these folks do has lasted over 10 years, since I met Butch. Everyone on their block, where the clubhouse is located, keeps the block clean of litter, bums, and any sort of bad element. I've seen members helping people with their groceries, giving people good advice, where to eat, party, sightsee, etc. And I have always seen members respect women. The nicest thing Butch ever did for me and his son was tell us, "You guys have a future and no tattoos. Don't live a life of crime, pay your taxes, respect your parents, and be a good person." I took his advice, and 10 years later I'm a former high school dropout that is going to start his MBA in the fall and part-time law school next fall. Best thing a gang ever did for me was care enough to tell me straight to my face that I will be a good human. I will always honor, respect and have so much love for Butchie G. I remember back in high school, there was this one Korean kid that I knew since 9th grade. He was very quiet, to himself, smart kid. He was your average nerd. But around good friends, he was a different person, fucking hilarious dude, mad outgoing, etc etc. He left an impression on everyone there during 11th grade. This dude we all knew was picking on him and calling him names and all that. Classic bullying basically. I remember I was in study hall and I saw the dude back at it. All of a sudden, the Korean kid flipped or punched out the other guy. The entire school was talking about it for weeks. So, 2003 rolls around and we all graduated high school, so everyone went on their own way. I kept in touch with the other Korean kid named Henry for years. Then, I heard he was arrested. Why? These dudes were bothering him on his block causing mad trouble, so he snapped and took a machete and cut up the dudes that were bothering him. They all survived, but suffered injuries of course. I later found out that he started the whole thing and I guess it was a revenge attack against those guys. I don't know what charges they got him with, but they must have been serious, because he was locked up with the worst of the worst in Rikers Island prison for 3 years. After those 3 years, he randomly hit me up on MySpace, along with my other boy who was mad cool with him in high school. Henry, who was a little heavy set back in high school, I guess took his time in prison to work out. He was ripped. He was all tattooed up. He told me in prison he joined a section of the triads, and so on and so forth. He came to us to basically thank us for being his friend during high school, and thanked us for not being like that other dude he punched lol. He eventually moved to another town, and he left us with this: if you ever need anything, trust me, I got connections, your problems will disappear.